Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir Sultan, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Talia Lavin's new book, Culture Warlords, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Dass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until, after over 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so appreciative of it. And also for your patience tonight while we sorted out the technical difficulties. So tonight we are beyond excited to have with us Talia Lavin to launch her new book, Culture Warlords: My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. Talia is every skinhead's worst nightmare, a loud and unapologetic Jewish woman, acerbic, smart, and profoundly anti-racist, with the investigative chops to expose the tactics and ideologies of online hate mongers. She's a Harvard University alum and freelance writer with nearly 114,000 followers on Twitter, including Joss Whedon, AOC, and Chrissy Teigen, and she has also had bylines in The New Yorker, The New Republic, The New York Times Review of Books, The Washington Post, The Village Voice, and more. Joining her in conversation is Strand alum and favorite Mona Eltahawy. Mona is a feminist author, commentator, and disruptor of patriarchy. Her first book, Headscarves and Hymens: Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution, targeted patriarchy in the Middle East and North Africa. And her second, The Seven Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, took her disruption worldwide. Her commentary has appeared in media around the world, and she makes video essays as Feminist Giant, which I will be dropping a link to later in the chat, which is also the name of the newsletter of which she's the founder and editor-in-chief. Providing tonight's interpreter services are interpreters from Pro Bono ASL. Our first interpreter will be Jessie Ann, and our second interpreter will be Lori. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Talia and Mona to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Talia.
Hi.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to be speaking to you. And the Strand means so much to me. Actually, in high school, I worked across the street from the Strand for a summer, and I would just go in. And there was one particular corner where all you could see was books all around you. And I thought, someday my book will be in here. And then it's really a dream come true for me to be able to do a Strand book event. So I'm really geeking out right now.
I too love the Strand, and I love the fact that our pictures was together there on the front door advertising this event. And I hope we can have an event in person there sometime soon when we emerge from this global fuckery.
Yeah.
Let's get to your book because I think your book is perfect for this moment. Your book is so powerful, and your book is so personally written, which is exactly what I needed to read at this time. Because one of my main frustrations as someone who was born in Egypt and who is of Muslim descent is that ever since I moved to the United States, the kind of coverage that we have needed to speak out that could have helped us prevent this moment that we're in right now, and I don't mean a pandemic, I mean a fascist fuck called Donald Trump, is the kind of coverage that you have jumped into with your book. Because you do not write as this distant, unaffected, let's have a debate about something that's going to kill so many other people except me. You write and you say, this is about people who want to kill me, and I love that. So tell me when you decided, I'm going to write this book because these fuckers are going to kill me, and I'm going to write this book and expose them.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty concise depiction of the journey that I had. I also want to just quickly offer thanks to the ASL interpreter who's doing a yeoman's job. I have written about disability justice, and I'm so happy to be able to offer an accessible event to readers from the deaf and hard of hearing communities. But sorry, separate question. So I came in right to the process of writing Culture Warlords about 2 years ago, and I was very angry already. I mean, I'd had, the Daily Stormer, which is sort of the flagship, the New Yorker of the neo-Nazi movement, the flagship racist website, write multiple articles about me using the K slur for Jews, rhymes with like. And I'd had, death threats and rape threats against me personally and against people I loved and knew well. And so I didn't come in neutrally. And I don't think that I appreciate that readers like you found that an asset in the book. Because for me, I think too much of the American press corps operates from a viewpoint that I call sometimes to myself moral toddlerism. This idea of sort of perennial surprise of the world and how, we can perennially expect a new tone from Donald Trump. And, you have to operate in almost this way where you've made a Prometheus-esque deal where some, American flag droop eagle comes and eats your memory lobe every day. And you have to write from that perspective. And instead, I chose to write a book that was in many ways rooted in my identity as a Jewish woman, someone for whom the Holocaust is not even a generation away. I actually lost an aunt during the Holocaust. My mother lost a sister. My grandparents lost their entire families. And so for me, the moral stakes were high and close. And I understood always the sort of wages of this rhetoric and allowing the far right to organize unchecked. And so that's really the perspective that I brought to the book. And while it may be unusual in the world of journalism to have that kind of moral perspective, for me, it was indispensable and really helped me survive writing the book without starting to treat these people as subjects of disinterested fascination when we know they're capable of so much horror and harm.
Right. That definitely came through, and I really appreciate that. And I became a journalist in 1990, and this so-called objectivity that is just kind of stamped into our heads. It's like, are we really objective? This myth of objectivity, and who does it serve? Again and again, the question. So for me, as a Muslim, when I write anything that has to do with the United States today, central to what I'm writing and what I'm thinking is the fact that in 2012, a man set my brother's mosque on fire. And in that building, just a few hours before this act of arson, my nieces and nephews were at Sunday school. So again, these things are right there. After 9/11, my brother had special agents from the FBI interrogating him, and he had to be registered on this special registration for men who were Muslim and at the time not US citizens. So this idea of you have to write as if it's, you're at arm's distance, very few of us have the privilege of being at arm's distance with that. And I especially appreciated your anecdote, at the beginning of the book when you talk about hate, in that you were so giving of the horrors that are sent your way. You talk about the things that are sent to you on Twitter. You talk about the things that your friends sent you from various sites. And you speak about how those things are not unusual for women, but it also depends on the kind of woman you are. And your journey in journalism began as an intern with the JTA, right? And tell us a bit about that, because at the beginning of the book, you kind of lay the foundation of these white supremacists and how you got to know them. So tell us a bit about that before I take the journey further with you.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that I write from a place of immense privilege and from the sort of almost complete assimilation into whiteness that white-presenting Jews have accomplished in the United States in the last few decades. And so I write with an awareness of that privilege that when I first began my career in journalism in 2013, working at the Jewish telegraphic agency Newswire, I started to realize that a big portion of our web traffic was coming from stormfront.org, like the biggest Nazi message board on the internet at the time. I was moderating the comments as an intern, really an enviable job for anyone. And I started seeing all these anti-Semitic threats, this real barbarism. And for me, it sort of exploded a little myth that I'd had in my head that, like, okay, the Holocaust happened over there, and here I'm safe. I'm the scion of an American dream. I got to go to Harvard and everything's okay. And then I realized, no, anti-Semitism is here. It's out of the jackboots and behind the keyboard. And now it's got its jackboots on again. And so that was really my first big encounter as an adult. And subsequently, in the years leading up to and following the 2016 election, my encounters with anti-Semitism grew more frequent and more intense. And so that was part of the genesis of the book, encountering it so personally. It was always visceral and personal, as hate always is. And I think particularly as a woman, particularly as a larger woman who doesn't fit sort of the Aryan beauty ideal, things can get very vicious and very sexualized and very cruel. And so my resolution, as yours is always to double down and fight back. And that's the story of Culture Warlords, is me deciding to kind of triple down and look back at the abyss that was looking into me, and fight back as hard as I could.
Right, the screen froze there for a bit, so I didn't hear your last sentence. Could you say it one more time?
Oh, just I think the genesis of Culture Warlords was me deciding to, sorry, a sword fell over. Me deciding to look back at the abyss that was looking into me, and to fight back by looking as hard as I could.
Right, and part of looking back and taking up your space and saying, I'm here and I'm going to fight and all of that, is recognizing, as you say in the book, that anti-Semitism is one of the linchpins of white supremacy. It's not new. It's been in the United States. It's been around the world for a very long time. But it's one of the horrors and a form of the barbarisms that have been unleashed by Trump, not invented by Trump, but unleashed by him. And many of us, as we were watching Trump campaign during the last election cycle, in the run-up to the 2016 campaign, saw all of that happening and were warning people, the way he talked about Mexicans, the way he talked about women, the way he talked about Muslims, the way he talked about disabled people, all of that. Did you feel frustrated in that run-up? Was that part of your impetus for this? Did you get together with friends? I mean, I've known you on Twitter for a while now, but I just want to know your mindset I want people to know your mindset in the run-up to the last election so that we can take it to this election coming up. We're going to talk about your book. It's not just about the elections, but I want to know what it was like for you to watch all of this stuff erupting that you knew was always there. And that, like you were saying, this childish naivete of people going, oh, this is not my America.
Yeah, no, it is America. It always has been. And I think, at the time, the most frustrating thing was, like, after he was elected, this, like, give him a chance rhetoric, this weird rhetoric of, like, let's just give him a chance. Like, do you give syphilis a chance? Like, oh, let's give this flesh-eating crab a chance to eat our flesh. Like, absolutely not. I mean, we saw what he campaigned on, which was unbridled white nationalism. Mm-hmm. We saw what he stirred up, which was hate crimes that he, like, there's this expression used consistently about him and white supremacy, like he refused to distance himself from or refused to condemn white supremacy. And it's almost like, if you have to ask him to do so, like, what does any mealy-mouthed statement coaxed out of him mean? I mean, when two of his supporters in the 2015-2016 campaign season beat up a Latino homeless man and urinated on him, he called them patriots. And so it was always clear what he stood for. Mm-hmm. And certainly his election, his election was by no means the birth of the white power movement in the United States. And if he gets taken down from the presidency, it will not signify the end of it, and it may in fact usher in an uptick in violence. It's hard to tell. Things are very unrestful at the moment in this country. But, you know, so it didn't begin or end with him, but what's undeniable, and what, you know, every person who studies the far right knows, is that his campaign and subsequent election were huge shots in the arm to the white power movement. I mean, you're talking entire new groups were created, their membership exploded. There were suddenly all these people who felt comfortable and at ease and permitted to act on the white nationalism and the racism that was clearly always an animating force inside them.
Right. One of the things that I really appreciate about your book, as you know, along with all those things that you just said, was that you examine the connections between Christianity and white supremacy in the United States. And I especially love, so there's the chapter where Tommy appears, where it's the second time that Tommy appears, because Tommy appears, well, we're going to get to Ashley soon, but I want to talk about Tommy and the way that Tommy tried to go to the event, that the mixed martial arts event between the Christians and the paganists, which I shouldn't be laughing, because on the face of it, it sounds absurd, because you've got Christians and paganists fighting to raise money for a Satanist. Was that what he was? It was just the most absurd thing. But I'm bringing it up because I'd love for you to share the kind of your attempt to get at the history of this, because this construction of whiteness and their determination to connect it to some historical thing. Tell us about that, and tell us why Tommy went out to meet it, and who is Tommy?
Okay, lots to tackle there. So this is referring to one of the chapters in the book, That Good Old Time Religion, which is about religious traditions in the white supremacist movement. So one of the points that I make in several chapters in the book is that like any form of nationalism, this sort of pan-global white nationalism looks to history, creates mythological histories in order to bolster itself and to posit itself as a noble cause. So when you're looking at what are the myths that white nationalism uses to generate this idea of a mythic past, a glorious past, you know, to return to, the two linchpins or two major fonts of sort of symbolism, strength, are the Crusades. So, you know, the 11th and 12th century Crusades, which, you know, they have a very anachronistic view, and some of the most amazing people I spoke to for the book were like really pissed off medieval historians. Were like, we don't want our fields of study to be used in this horrible way by white supremacists. So the Crusades function as sort of a lost cause for white supremacists, in the same way that neo-Confederates use the Civil War. It's this idea that once there was a total civilizational conflict between, you know, whites, even though back in the 1100s, white and the white race was not like yet an operational category. It's a complete anachronism that, you know, takes constructs that were invented in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and puts them back into the medieval era. But at any rate, there's this idea that the pure white men of the sword were, you know, going to vanquish the, you know, evil, swarthy, barbarous other, and so, you know, and defend the holy city against them. And, you know, it's not hard to imagine how contemporary Islamophobia, how contemporary phobia of migrants can play into the construct of this myth for contemporary extremist Christians. And then on the other side, you have white supremacist pagans who worship Ausatru, which is sort of the modern incarnation of worship of the Norse pantheon. And there are all kinds of, you know, heathen pagan symbols that have been appropriated by white supremacists. The Valknut, various Celtic imagery, worship of Odin. There's a militantly anti-immigrant group in Finland and the United States and Canada called the Soldiers of Odin. So there are groups that that utilize the imagery of Norse mythology and also the sort of masculine past of the Vikings. They draw on Norse mythology as an indigenous white religion. That's actually, some of them are too anti-Semitic to be Christian because Jesus was a Jew. So it's like you can't even be Jesus, and people, if you can be Jesus and people will still be anti-Semitic towards you, which is amazing to me. And I kind of laughed a great deal about it. So, but the specific story that I tell, the sort of anchor story of that chapter is I wound up in like kind of, I had an alter ego. There are a lot of alter egos I created for this book, just because as someone who was a known quantity to the far right, in a hostile way, and who is a Jew and who is a woman, it was very hard for me to come in the front door. I tried to attend a few events, and to get people to speak to me on the record. It was very difficult. And so I had to go gonzo and create these alter egos. And so Tommy, I had like all my male white supremacist alter egos were named Tommy for some reason. I don't know why. It's just like, if they all had the same name, they were easier to sort out in my head somehow. And like, it just seemed like such an unthreatening middle American name. Like no one would be like, what? Your name is Tommy? How weird. And I don't know. But so Tommy was a creation of mine. He was, from West Virginia, so that he was like relatively close to where the event was supposed to take place in Kentucky. And I got pretty deep into the planning chats for this Christians versus pagans MMA white supremacist fighting bout, where the pagans would, give blut, these offerings to Odin. The Christians would pray to defeat their heathen foes, and they were all raising money for a guy named Augustus Sol Invictus, a convicted domestic abuser and Satanist who had admitted to Politico that he drank goat blood for his religious ceremonies. So to me, it spoke to the fact that there are these religious traditions that serve as fonts of inspiration, but to one extent or another, the differences are more aesthetic than they are moral, and that white supremacist Christians and pagans might seem to be at odds, but they'll come together for the cause of the white race and to do violence in its name. And so, of course, the event eventually fell apart because the movement is perennially plagued by infighting. But it was fascinating to get an inside view on the planning of that event and everything that entailed.
And we thank you for that, because that's incredible work, and that's so heavy. And what you said about this man who was a convicted domestic abuser, I mean, nicely dovetails, because all of this shit, all of this hate is connected, because they're anti-Semitic, they're Islamophobic, and they're also misogynist as fuck. And the other anecdote that you write in the book that is really awful, we talked about it earlier when we were on the phone, that I want you to tell us about this other anecdote that really kind of throws center stage the horrendous misogyny of these groups, before I take Ashley and Tommy, into other anecdotes. But tell us about this anecdote that is connected to you and is really horrible, but we have to discuss it.
Sorry, which the one?
The deer.
Oh yes. So one of the things about being a woman covering this stuff, and I'm aware of the sort of white feminist valences of as a woman, as if my experience is universal. But I will say that among the female presenting people I know who cover the far right, there is a level of sexualized violence leveled against us that far outstrips what our male counterparts experience. So I once had a guy who I know who covers the far right, you know, who's an activist against the far right, say that he felt like a lot of white supremacists experience him, or like had told him that they felt like it was Batman versus the Joker with him, that they were almost like equal and opposite adversaries. And I will say that for female presenting people in this environment, that is just not the case. Like, I don't even get to be poison ivy. I'm just literally poison ivy. I'm like a rash, a plant that you want to get rid of. And so for me, that unfolded in a couple of ways. And I opened chapter 1 with you know, the experience of surveilling a neo-Nazi chat, a private neo-Nazi chat, and realizing they were talking about whether I was too ugly to rape. I mean, literally the question was, would anyone rape Talia Lavin? I would rape her with a gun. So that was like something I saw. They didn't know I was there, but they were just talking about it in absentia. This morning I was listening to a neo-Nazi podcast called The Daily Shoah, which uses the Hebrew word for Holocaust, Shoah, and it's a pun on The Daily Show. Nazis can sometimes be clever, which I hate, but anyway, they spent about 45 minutes talking about my fingers and how my fingernails are dirty and my cuticles are shredded, which I think my hands look fine. But anyway, my sausage fingers and how repulsive I am. I mean, it was just very physical and very bodily. And one of the more striking anecdotes, and this is what I told Mona on the phone, we have fun phone conversations, is so Paul Nealon, who was a candidate for Congress in Michigan, was endorsed by Donald Trump running against Paul Ryan. Now is an open white supremacist. He was an open white supremacist during his congressional campaign and was actually kicked off Twitter for just like being really anti-Semitic. But he got an obsession with an anti-fascist friend of mine. And I write this in the book, and it is true, and it is horrifying and like astounding to me that this man is still free and still posting hate and like absolutely no consequences to him. But he, you know, it was deer hunting season where he was, and he went and named a deer after my friend, shot the deer, flayed the deer, strung it up in an imitation of a lynching, kept posting photos of it, alternating with photos of her to his Telegram channel. That's an encrypted app that is used for a lot of reasons by a lot of people, but white supremacists love it because it's end-to-end encrypted and they don't kick anyone off, really. And he kept posting, and then he eventually made sausages out of the deer meat and spelled out her name in meat. I mean, that was really an astounding moment to me. That's how deep and violent the misogyny is. And I think for non-women who wrote about this stuff, who are in this space, I think the misogyny, because misogyny is so the background noise of everything in the United States, I mean, consider who our president is, consider our popular culture, it can be missed how deeply misogyny serves both as a driving engine of white supremacy, in that it provides feminist targets for them to throw hate at, and also it serves as a recruiting tactic. So a lot of the people who I call launderers in the book, the people who offer up, in essence, a means for people to become radicalized. They make YouTube videos about things like the Ghostbusters movie stole, like, with all women ruined your childhood, or it's shitty that there's a Captain Marvel movie, and they'll start there. And then once you have established that there is a class of people it's okay to hate, to wit, feminists, and that it's okay to express that hate, it's okay to harass those people. Once you have, and that this sort of idea of progressivism's progressive ideology of feminism is, you know, the thing that's keeping you from claiming your birthright, keeping you from all you're entitled to, it's oppressing you, it's holding you down, that serves as an entree point to all kinds of other ways of doing that. So, like, you know, it's a very short step from there, and it's a greased slope from there to what about the Jews? And well, what about Black people? And you'll often see Islamophobia used in the same fashion, where they use these nominally more socially accepted forms of hatred as an entree into the white supremacist community and the white power community. So these are like the fact that these forms of hatred are so socially acceptable, even to very violent degrees, are vulnerabilities on a national scale to the growth of the white power movement.
Right. Well, when I was reading your book, and to speak to all of those points, and to speak and bring in what our experiences in the world are like and how these things impact us, it made me remember two incidents I had with Customs and Border Patrol people at the airport, when I was flying back in the days when we were flying. And the first time that I was returning to the US from Canada, you have to do your customs and passport stamping and everything on the Canadian side, but it's all these American CBP guys, right? And one of them asked me what I was doing in Canada, and I told him I'd just given a lecture on feminism at Concordia University. And the day before, a Lebanese politician had been assassinated, and so he asked me if I knew that, if I'd heard of this, and I said, yes, of course I had. And he looked me straight in the eye and said, I think it's time for a third crusade. And I was like, excuse me? Now, at the time I was flying on an Egyptian passport, and my middle name is overtly Muslim. And he kept looking at me and kept looking at my passport, and he was flirting and threatening at the same time, to the extent that I said to him, are you flirting with me or are you threatening me? Because I want to know what's going on here. And then a few years after that, coming back to the US, I had tattoos, and I saw one of the CBP guys with tattoos. I asked him about his tattoos, and he straight up looked me in the eye and said, this tattoo is to celebrate the Crusades. And I'm like, what? Coming into the United States, these are officials. These are the DHS guys, and if you're a white man, if you're a white presenting, male presenting person, you're not going to get that. But, if you're Egyptian, if you're of Muslim descent, if you're Jewish, if you're a person of color, if you're Black, if you're trans, all the people that you say in your book, you want to be safe from this violence, we get this all the time. And the reporters who don't report from that, this is why I love your book so much, they don't get that. This is all something that it's not background noise for them. It just doesn't even register. So I really appreciate that. And I can only imagine how hard it was. So I want you to tell us how hard it was to become Tommy and to become Ashley, one of your other nom de guerres, so that you could go undercover and experience it as if you were a white woman, a white presenting female, or a white female presenting person, or a white man. How hard was it for you to become Ashley and go on white dating sites, white supremacist dating sites?
Well, I mean, one of the things that really characterized the experience of reporting this book was just immersing myself in vitriol in a very total way. I joined between 80 and 100 different far-right chat rooms, and I was monitoring most of them every day. So the sheer degree of racial slurs, the sheer degree of anti-Semitism, the way sometimes I was a target personally, and certainly people I love and know became targets as well. It was psychically a very difficult thing to do. To do that, it made me really walk past the boundaries of myself. And, there was some amount of psychological turmoil that it took and has still, and since I'm still working on infiltration-based projects, is still taking. But I will say, though, that having these noms de guerre and using particularly the Ashland persona, where I, used twice, once in a very long operation where I infiltrated whitedate.net a white supremacist, whites-only dating site, and got men to write love letters to their ideal white wife, which I print in the book. And I talked to, lots of different men who were just looking for their submissive Aryan queen. And a separate operation in which I exposed a Ukrainian neo-Nazi, revealing him to the world and helping to break up his stochastic terror cell in Ukraine by pretending to be an Iowan, babe, Aryan babe. So I will say that I did get sort of an acrid little pleasure in my own duplicity after a while, especially after so long being exposed to their bile and feeling so powerless. You also might notice the array of swords behind me. So I thought I would do a little Gallagher moment and just show off my swords, because I can do that because we were in my room and I couldn't bring these to the Strand in person. Oh wait, what's the sign for sword? That's so awesome. Sorry, I didn't know what the ASL sign for sword was, and now I do. So here's a sword I'm very proud of. I started collecting these after I started writing the book. A very dear friend and beloved comrade gave me my first big broadsword on Doril, this guy. And then I just started acquiring more. I think having a lot of big blades that I kind of know how to use by my side while receiving rape and death threats of varying seriousness on a daily basis. It just formed a big psychological help for me. I have these within reach of whenever I'm sleeping. So this one has a big old Star of David on it too. And that just feels like a big fuck you. Every single Nazi. It is 4 feet long. I am 5'3", so it's like a pretty large portion of my body height. This is a smaller sword, but I think it's still pretty cool. This is my saber. It's a Union cavalry saber replica, and so it says E pluribus unum on it because it was meant to kill Confederates. And acquiring this was, I acquired this right after I handed in the draft of the book. And I felt it was an appropriate fuck you. So that's the bladed weaponry showcase portion of the evening. So all of this is to say I'm an agoraphobe who collects swords, and that's part of the mental wages of doing digital battle with white supremacists here in Ukraine, everywhere they rear their ugly heads. And no matter how many threats they issue, I will not be silenced. My take.
And I salute you for that. And I love your swords. And I love all the pictures that you post on Twitter with your swords, because they're the ultimate fuck you, especially seeing as these guys kept sending all these letters and the way that they gush over these submissive women. And so to see you with the swords, I mean, I can only imagine you're Ashley, getting all these letters saying, I love my women to be these submissive, I don't know what, and love forever, and we have 50 children or whatever. And then, when you're done with Ashley, you're on Twitter with the sword saying, I'm gonna fucking cut you. And
I'm like a fat Jewish sword wielding woman. I'm like the opposite of everything they want, and I became what they desired only in order to expose them. I mean, there's a whole lot of psychosexual dynamism in there that I leave to the reader to sort out and encourage you to buy the book to discover more of. But I will just say that you and I were both religious minorities in a Christian dominionist state. You and I are both uncompromising feminist warriors who are not afraid to say the word fuck or to be vulnerable, which are both equally difficult things. To be fierce and to be vulnerable at the same time. And so I think that, one of the great weapons in the arsenal of the fight against white supremacy is that vulnerability, is that open declaration that we're going to care for one another. And is that solidarity in the face of hate? Because the antidote to hate isn't apathy or freezing it out or ignoring it or just letting it play out in the marketplace of ideas. It is fierce love that crowds out hate and shouts down bigotry.
Yeah. And talking of fierce love and fighting back and being uncompromising, even when we're being vulnerable, I want to bring in questions, because there's a question here that I had actually wanted to introduce. So thank you, Mahfouz, for reminding me of this. The question is, Talia, in interacting with white supremacists as Ashley and Tommy, were you ever surprised by moments of humanity from white supremacists, if any? And if so, how did you reckon with holding that and their hatred at the same time?
So I think that's a great question. And I sort of bring this up almost from the introduction to the book. I think one of the great vulnerabilities that America has towards recognizing and facing down the white power movement, at least those people who are at least nominally interested in checking it, there are many who are sympathizers, is this idea that we expect white supremacists to be monsters. We expect them to be stupid. We expect them to be poor. We expect them to be ignorant and uneducated. And all of these different stereotypes, this idea of sort of Cletus in the basement, he's toothless, he's masturbating, he's physically incapable of doing anything with his arms except sig heiling, who does this serve? Cui bono, right? And so we've seen all this weird, credulous, almost fetishistic journalism about those white supremacists who managed to string a few sentences together and wear a suit. So all the dapper Nazi profiles of Richard Spencer. There was an infamous article in the New York Times about Tony Hilfiger, a member of the Traditionalist Workers' Party, the Nazi next door. And I was like so shocked that he had a wife and he had a house and he could like cook pasta without like jizzing a swastika onto the wall while like boiling the water. And the truth is, like, the majority of people that I talked to and that I interacted with, they are precisely that. They're human. They're human all over. The people that I talked to on the dating site had recipes for dinner and they wanted to know what I like to eat and what I did for fun. They are humans first and foremost. And they make the human choice to engage in hate. To me, I don't think that their humanity absolves them. I don't think it's difficult for me to hold at the same time the idea that they are human and the idea that they are filled with hate. Every atrocity, and every racist atrocity in particular, in the history of mankind has been carried out by a human being with a full life, and often with gainful employment and a spouse. These things are not impossible to comprehend at all. And I think the idea that white supremacists are inhuman monsters absolves us of thinking, could it be someone in my neighborhood? Could it be someone in my school? Could it be someone sitting in the cubicle next to me back when we could work in cubicles? And the truth is it could be. There is no level of educational attainment. There is no socioeconomic class. There is no geographical area that makes you immune to the white power movement, because it draws on the same vulnerabilities, like loneliness, desire to be part of a greater cause, and desire to cause harm that all of us feel. So no, it doesn't confound me when I encounter a human Nazi or an eloquent Nazi or a rich Nazi, because I know that Nazis can be any of these things. And that's one of the sort of most, if I want people to have one takeaway from the book, not a bad one, would be the Nazi could be next door. Don't be shocked. It could be anyone. It's not just the drooling, like Southern poor idiot from your classist fantasy. It can be, anyone, really, from anywhere. There's no immunity in this country.
Next question, Talia, and thank you, Heather, for also bringing this in, because there's so much I want to talk to Talia about, and one of the issues was incels, and this is coming up now. So Heather asks Talia, Did anyone in any of your interactions ever discuss why they held white supremacist views or misogynist views? Raised to, came to it for other reasons, and also was there an overlap into the incel community? So it's kind of two questions there.
Yeah, so a couple of, I'm trying to like answer both questions. I mean, I think everyone in this country has a certain ambient level of misogyny and white supremacy bred into them. They are the sort of water in which we swim. The question is whether you choose to devote your life to fighting it and to counter-programming what you've been raised with or not. You lean in, you make it your animating feature. And having spent so much time on hate sites, I'm going to fondle my sword as I answer these questions. I'm sorry. Is how do you recognize a hate site? And one of the big ways that one of the big distinguishing features of a hate site that I learned to recognize is, like, are they consistently reporting crimes by the targeted outgroup that they hate? So Breitbart had a black crime tag. All the like neo-Nazi news sites that I visited had crimes by refugees, by people of color, by Jews, by Black people, like persistently as sort of part of their news gathering operation. Most of their news that they posted was that. And incels posted crimes by women. It was the same hate mechanism. It was just directed at like the female half of the human population. So that was a distinguishing feature on all the incel message boards I visited, was crimes by women. So people are rarely raised towards this specific level of animated hatred. It's a matter of choosing to lean in. But within these radicalization factories, one of the ways people are trained into sort of violence in these viewpoints, or sort of entrenching these viewpoints, is through propaganda that convinces you that your enemy is other and degenerate and criminal. So whether that's women or minorities, or both. And as to the question of, are all incels white supremacists and vice versa, first of all, like, plenty of white supremacists get laid, have girlfriends, have wives. And there are women in the white supremacist movement as well. But as to the incel community, what's interesting to me about the incel community is that it is by no means monolithically white. Incels.co is a message board that I infiltrated for the book. And there was sort of an internal poll, are you white or not? And it was like 60-40, white, non-white. But 40% of the community being non-white is pretty significant. I mean, hatred of women, certainly crosses ethnic boundaries for men. But it was still, despite being a 40% non-white community, a fertile recruiting ground for white supremacists, had many white supremacist members, and white supremacist dialogue was so common on the site that there were almost like meta discussions about, like, is white supremacy just another sort of means of coping with our feminism dominated reality that puts men at a disadvantage? So just like the environment of radicalized, sort of oozing misogynistic hatred made it a fertile recruiting ground, even if not everyone was white. So that's my answer on incels.
Great. All right. I have one here now on Ukraine. Carol asks, hi, Talia. I'd love to hear more about your experiences living in Ukraine. There seems to have been more and more cross-pollination between white supremacist groups since the conflict in Donbass began. Are you tracking any other hotspots?
Yeah, so I spent a year living in Ukraine after college in 2013, so it's been a while. Моє українське я не розмовляю дуже гарно зараз. My Ukrainian has gone way down since then. But what's been interesting to me is that, yes, you're right. Since the war with Russia broke out in Donbass, there has been an interesting or like horrifying, bad level of cross-pollination between the Ukrainian far-right movement, which is sort of very ascendant and very, very tolerated by the government there. I mean, the Azov battalion is a major white supremacist group. there that actually forms like part of an unofficial part of Ukraine's army. There's a lot of tolerance for the radical right in Ukraine, which is not to say Ukraine is a white supremacist country. Like, I don't believe that, but they have a big radical armed far right. And there have been like lots and lots of American white supremacists who have gone, sometimes even fought on the front lines of the Donbass conflict, who have trained with the Azov Battalion. Members of the Rise Above movement in the United States have gone and like done MMA boxing in Kiev with like Ukrainians. It is fascinating, and to me, it underscores the ways in which this is a global movement. White supremacy. It's like white nationalism, white internationalism, as it were. This idea that there are white countries that white people should reclaim by, ethnic cleansing, through breeding with quiescent, docile Aryan women, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a global movement. Ukraine is certainly a hotspot for it, and there is mutual exchange of ideas and support. And in fact, the Christchurch shooter, Brenton Tarrant, visited Kyiv, on one of his world tours and said it was a beautiful, wonderful, inspiring white European city. So, yes, there is discourse between, and he's from Australia. So it is a global movement, and Ukraine forms one of its nexuses. I will say, however, the United States remains probably the primary hotspot for the white power movement, and it's one of the things we export because we are so good at exporting culture.
All right, I'm going to combine two questions because we're kind of coming up towards the end, so I'm going to combine these two. One, did you encounter the Proud Boys as you researched for the book, and how would you define their role in current far-right movements? And the second, what do you think would be the best way to eradicate white supremacy?
Okay, so the Proud Boys, I definitely encountered them. I mean, I think anyone who studies the far right encounters them. It's like very easy to get bogged down in semantic questions about whether they're white supremacist or not. They argue that they're not. They have some non-white members. I would say look at their tenets. Their tenets are Islamophobic. They call themselves Western chauvinists. And I will say the existence of non-white members is not enough to say that an organization is not a white supremacist organization. There will always be people who, just because Candace Owens is a Republican speaker doesn't mean that, the Republican Party isn't a racist party. Tokenism is its own, is its own separate and distinct and fascinating phenomenon. And there are Jews who are white supremacists too. I mean, look at Stephen Miller. So I did encounter and know the Proud Boys. I didn't infiltrate them, although they have a dating site. So if anyone is interested in catfishing, check out the Proud Boys dating site. I'm sure it is ripe for catfishing. So, if you want to do something fucked up to your psyche and maybe expose a couple Proud Boys in your area along the way, check that out. I did encounter the Proud Boys. They're fucked up. They're white supremacists. They're street brawlers, and they absolutely want to cause as much pain as possible to anyone who disagrees with their political ideology. And I consider them to be a white supremacist group. As to your second question, how do we eradicate white supremacy? And I think I saw an awesome question, which is how can people get started contributing to intel gathering in their own community? I think these are sort of the same questions. One of the things I talk about in the book, and when I am asked this question, how do we fight? I always say the same thing, that I think we as a collective, as everybody, need to reimpose the social cost of bigotry. It has eroded over the past 5 years of having a white supremacist in office. The shame of naked racism has eroded, and we need to bring back that shame. We need to make it clear, even at cost to ourselves, and with greater effort than a yard sign, that racism has no home in our communities. And so I would encourage you to, okay, who's that guy on your Facebook feed wilding out, maybe posting some racist stuff? Can you poke into him? Can you figure out if he's part of any organized racist groups? If so, Should his employer know about it? Should he be employed? Does he teach kids? Does he have power over vulnerable people, or, have coworkers of color or customers of color? And if so, should he have the position he has? I think we need to start all acting like anti-fascists in our communities and not be afraid to be called that, because it's what we all should be. And I don't mean in that watered down way where people are like, my grandfather was Antifa in World War II. Like, no, he wasn't. He was a soldier in the US military. You have to decide to be an anti-fascist. You have to decide to protect your community. You have to decide to put your skin on the line. But that's what history demands of us at this moment. So start with your town. Start with your neighborhood. Figure out who are the people causing trouble. Who are the hate groups around here? And, I wrote an article for The Nation called How to Be an Anti-Fascist from Your Couch, that offers a couple of tips for how to do it. There's also a great resource by Spencer Sunshine, who is a wonderful anarchist, anti-fascist in New York, called 40 Ways to Combat the Far Right. You can Google that and find it. And I encourage you to start imposing a social cost on bigotry where you live. It's time, and it requires all of us to stand up and to impose that social cost again.
Thank you, Talia. It's been wonderful to speak with you, and just the fact that you're sitting there playing with your swords and basically, yes, vowing all kinds of "I will cut you" to white supremacist fucks delights me to no end. So
like this is the hammer against bigotry right here. No, and I really want to apologize for the technical difficulties and the delay. And I hope that you feel you've got your money's worth, especially if you're one of those wonderful souls that bought a signed copy of the book. And I'm so honored that I was able to speak at, even digitally at my favorite bookstore. So thank you so much.
Oh no!
And thank you to Mona, you should absolutely subscribe to Feminist Giant. She's been a hero of mine for such a long time. This is like so surreal in so many ways, but be a feminist giant. Subscribe to Mona's newsletter. Don't be afraid to say fuck the patriarchy.
Fuck the patriarchy.
The patriarchy.
Yes.
Oh, thank you both so much. I dropped links to purchase a signed copy of Culture Warlords, which you can purchase. It's showing up backwards, but you can purchase it. Also, a link to purchase the 7 necessary sins for women and girls, and then also a link to Mona's newsletter, Feminist Giant. So I may have spammed the chat a little, but there are multiple links. And then also, thank you, Mona, and thank you, Talia, for not only having this conversation with us tonight, but the work you generally do. You put yourselves on the line for all of us, and it is very appreciated. It's not easy work, and we are grateful.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
have a great night. And thank you to everyone for coming and asking such thoughtful questions. So take care. Have a good night.